Furina, the Hydro Archon, is going to be rerunning, but a lot has changed these days, and in this video I will be talking about Furina's pros and cons, and whether she's worth pulling for since her last rerun in version 4.7, especially now that a lot of Natlan units have been released, and there's new factors we need to consider. On top of this, I'll also share a lot of useful information, even if you already have her, or if you're still trying to decide if she's worth pulling for. But before we start, this video is sponsored by Once Human. The highly anticipated free open world game is finally launching on mobile this April. And as someone who played it, the best part is that it's not pay to win, so we don't have to worry about catching up to others. In fact, IGN rated Once Human 8 out of 10, and not only that, the mobile version is going to replicate the original PC gameplay, so that's a huge achievement for mobile gamers. Now, if you're like me and you enjoy Genshin, but looking for something more strange, it's definitely worth checking out Once Human. There's a massive open world set in post-apocalypse that you can explore, build bases and craft your items, and you can also customize your character any way you want. So there's a ton of freedom. But my favorite part are the big and weird bosses and monsters you can fight, plus there's also deviations. These little bizarre pals are super useful during your journey and will become your best teammates. So make sure to pre-register to Once Human on Google Play or App Store by using my link in the description, claim your exclusive Gold Cosmetics bundle, and participate in the lucky draw. But if you can't wait to play it, try it on Steam today and get limited PC player rewards now, and then easily connect to mobile version on April. So check out Once Human now. Okay, so one of the more interesting ways to start off this video would be to quickly go over Furina'S usefulness, since her last rerun was in version 4.7, and so let's see if she still holds up today after some powerful Natlan additions. But before we step into Natlan, in version 4.8, Emily came out, which, in all honesty, she doesn't have that much synergy with Furina in terms of team comps, but they can work if needed, such as the international team comp. However, when it comes to Natlan units like Mulanni, Kunich, and Mawika, all benefit from her buffing and can still utilize her. But Chaska is probably the one who benefits the most from Furina, since her playstyle specifically enjoys off-field hydro damage and application, while at the same time unloading those charge shots is a pretty strict way to play, since other hydro options like Xingqiu and Yalan are utilized with normal attackers or quick swap teams. Funnily enough, this is also the same reason why Furina for Yume Mizuki is the best hydro option, since all she can really do is just float around while using the skill. Plus, since her burst heals, Mizuki can help build up fanfare stacks to improve the team's damage. Also, special shoutout goes to Rerun when playing Taser teams. He is a perfect Cinder City buffer along with Furina. So overall, Furina hasn't been the most broken or best buffer for a lot of Natlan units, but she still remains as a super solid option. And for Chaska, she is one of the best options. Although, ever since Citlali came out, Furina can be substituted with her, but there's also teams where you can run both her and Citlali at the same time. If there's anything to go by, then we can see her top 10 teams these days are mostly made up of non-Natlan units, based on the usage stats. However, we can see in 7th place she's played together with Chaska, and on top of that, Shilonen works quite well with Furina to help build fanfare stacks, and we can see even Rerun helping with that Cinder City buff. Still, keep in mind when talking about Furina's viability, I am assuming she is C0. However, with C1 or C2 Furina, she absolutely enhances tons of Natlan team variations. That's not to say she doesn't already do that at C0, but with Constellation she becomes quite stronger, which I'll talk about a bit later. Anyway, that would be a short overview of her current state after all the new units came out. Next, let's talk about the most crucial things to consider when pulling for her, or if you already have her, what are some cool ways to utilize her. So, one of the biggest reasons why it's worth getting Furina would be her ability to give new purpose to healers. Since Furina's damage and healing buff during the burst is mostly stacked with healing, there's tons and tons of teams you can build with her. But probably the coolest thing about this is that some niche healers who aren't super popular actually become quite viable thanks to Furina. For example, Dory has been butt of the joke for a long time now, but what if I told you, thanks to Furina, Dory can actually function as a decent driver for quick bloom teams? Well, truth be told, it's best if Dory is C6, since it will help massively with healing, but before Furina, this upgrade was kinda still a joke and only enjoyed by the most loyal Dory players. However, these days, yeah, you can actually play a legit team of C6 Dory, Fischl, Furina, and Nahida. And if you're interested in trying it out, be sure to equip Dory with Thundering Fury, so she can spam her skill more often. Another healer that becomes really good is Noelle. Yeah, that 4-star you got a long time ago from the beginner banner is actually able to quickly build up Furina's fanfare stacks, and is a great on-field option to drive mono hydro teams. Same goes for Kokomi. She's already a very good unit, but can also be used as a driver for mono hydro or taser teams. Oh, and let's not forget Sijuin. As much as she has trouble with staying relevant, Furina does help her achieve peak potential, whatever that is. Still, it's important to keep in mind that at least when playing with C0 Furina, she's not going to be a great option for any team that doesn't have a healer or a good way to heal, since then you're basically stuck with your team having half HP bars and the buff won't be high due to the lack of fanfare stacks. And you might be thinking, what about the Numa state where she can heal? Well, it's pretty bad in Abyss, quite slow, and it's really only useful in overworld content, when you just need some heals. And then there's also C6, which benefits from Numa state, but that's for whales to play with. Now, the other thing that's important to understand about this Hydro Archon is that her Hydro application isn't the best, quite frankly. I mean, it's good, but some units like Hu Tao will just quickly override Furina's Hydro Aura on enemies, although other units like Yoimiya will have less trouble with that. The problem with Furina's Hydro application lies in its inconsistency, and even though for majority of characters it will be fine, in some cases you won't be able to rely on vaping from her Hydro Aura consistently. Speaking of more drawbacks, Furina's energy requirements are high enough that running her with energy recharge sword or sans is pretty normal, especially if you cannot activate the burst when you switch to her. In fact, Favonia's sword is one of her best options for a stress-free build, while the time-limited Festering Desire is one of her best free-to-play personal damage options, since it provides both ER and damage for her skill. What's also funny is that her signature doesn't even scale that incredibly well while she's at C0, and it becomes better when Furina is C1 or C2, something we'll talk about in a moment. But more or less, running her with 4-star options is absolutely normal even these days. Still, it's very important to acknowledge two of her best buddies, Neuvillette and Shenyun. When it comes to Nuvi, you have probably heard this a million times by now, but for C0 Neuvillette, Furina isn't actually the only best option, and instead, you could go for something like Shilonen, since achieving 3 different Hydro-related reactions is huge for Neuvillette's passive talent, because of the big damage boost it provides. However, at C1, Nuvi then only needs 2 different Hydro-related reactions to be triggered for him to fully utilize this passive, hence why everyone says Furina is best in slot for the C1 Auto-Cheese Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal guy. But let's talk about Shenyun, arguably the best healer you can pair with Furina for this one simple reason. You can basically enable any off-meta unit to be an actually good damage dealer. You've probably seen Xinyan plunging for big damage, Chongyun doing the same stuff, and Diluc joining in the fun as well. Thing is, the duo of Furina and Shenyun is absolutely a joy for those who want to bring weaker or less potent units into Abyss and other content. Obviously, this means you need to have Shenyun for this to work, but by pulling Furina, Shenyun becomes a very good pull for your account, but only if you truly value the idea of using any unit as a plunge attacker. Although Shenyun, Furina, and C6 Farazan is also the best team for Xiao players, but those who play him already know that anyway. However, if you don't have Shenyun and still want to bring out some DPS whose artifact set you haven't farmed yet, as long as you have one proper Hunter set, they can easily use it since Furina constantly manipulates HP and thus allows the DPS to gain plus 36% crit rate, which is a pretty crazy good benefit, especially considering Golden Troop is located at the same domain as Hunter set, and Golden Troop is the best set for Furina's personal damage, so you can efficiently farm both sets. Now, one thing we need to quickly go over would be the vertical investment, as some people call it. Basically, if you already own Furina or are thinking of getting multiple copies of her, just how good are her constellations? Well, the simple answer is, they are very good. C1 just by itself basically immediately grants 37.5% damage boost to the whole team thanks to the instant stacks of fanfare, plus the stack limit is increased as well, so overall, this constellation ends up boosting roughly by 12 to 14% whole team's damage, and it also becomes useful even in teams with less efficient healers. However, C2 is where the big money is at. Literally. It will allow Furina to gain fanfare stacks 3.5 times faster, and when building stacks above the limit, she will then gain maximum HP instead, which means better personal damage for her. So not only most single target healers become good enough to reach maximum fanfare stacks, but Furina starts hitting for a lot more damage. And as I said, if you do wish to quote-unquote invest into her, then getting her constellations is a much better deal than getting her signature, which only becomes quite good after Archer C2. Anyway, that's the basic gist of Furina as of 2025. As someone who is still actively using her in almost every Abyss cycle and has her C1 unlocked, I think she has a lot of future potential. Mostly due to the fact that unlike other buffers, her damage boosting is simply generic. It's not boosting attack or specific elemental damage. The boost literally applies to anyone's damage, which is amazing to say the least. And come on, if you watched any of my first impressions videos of new characters, chances are Furina will always end up in the showcase as well, since she's so flexible. But I wouldn't say everyone needs to pull for her, because everyone's account is different, and you might already have better units to play with than Furina. So don't feel pressured to get her, especially if you don't find her playstyle or design enjoyable. Remember, play the game to have fun. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, and I'll soon be talking about the 5.5 content. So be sure to subscribe to my channel. We're almost at 400k subscribers, which is pretty crazy, and I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. Thanks, and see you soon.